Hi, good afternoon. My name is Andre Perloni. I'm the branch chief for the Imports Compliance branch in the Division of Global Drug Distribution and Policy in the Office of Drug Security, Integrity, and Response in the Office of Compliance. I will be talking about provide an overview of the pre-launch activities importation request, or as we call it, PLAIR. Learning objectives, PLAIR overview and product eligibility, define when and how a PLAIR can be submitted, list the information that should be submitted to FDA in a PLAIR, and explain the circumstances under which FDA intends to grant a PLAIR and the import process. Why PLAIR? Section 505A of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act prohibits the introduction into interstate commerce of any new drug unless an approval of an application is effective. Section 801A3 of the Act in part also say that the drug being imported is subject to refusal of admission if it's in violation of Section 505 of the Act. The PLAIR allows, under certain circumstances, product sponsors anticipating approval of a drug application to import the unapproved new drug to prepare it for market launch. What products are eligible? A finished dosage form drug product that is being imported to prepare for US market launch based on anticipated approval of a pending NDA, ANDA or ANDA, or a BLA regulated by CDER. A finished dosage of bulk product that may require minimal further processing, such as final packaging and or labeling, or being a final package form. The PLAIR does not apply to APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients or drug products subject to a supplement. When to submit a PLAIR? A PLAIR should be submitted at least 30 days prior to the proposed entry date of the shipment to allow time to process the submission. Additional time frame considerations. NDAs, ANDAs, and BLAs subject to standard review no more than 60 days before the user fee goal date. NDAs and BLAs subject to priority review up to 120 days before the user fee goal date. ANDAs subject to priority review up to 80 days before the user fee goal date. How to submit a PLAIR? FDA has developed an electronic submission system through the CDER NextGen portal. The CDER NextGen portal permits an applicant or authorized US agent to submit a PLAIR request to FDA electronically. It provides real-time communication with receipt confirmation, two-way communication, and communication history in a centralized location, a multi-factor authentication to ensure data security. What must be included in a PLAIR? The drug product name and how it's applied, the name of the CDER Office of New Drug and Office of Generic Drug Regulatory Project Manager assigned to the pending application, the NDC number if one is assigned, the name and address, registration number, and telephone number of the foreign manufacturer of the finished dosage form drug product, the name and address, registration number, and telephone number of the US consignee, application number of the finished dosage form product pending the FDA approval, a letter from FDA officially documenting the user fee goal date, and the precise quantity to be imported. Please note that only one import shipment will be allowed under a granted PLAIR. Name, facility identification, and telephone number of where the finished dosage form drug product will be stored pending approval. And for cases where there's minimal processing, right, information about the facility and the description of what that minimal processes is. The authorized representative applicant will also acknowledge that the product is an unapproved new drug and that the PLAIR represents the applicant's request to recondition the product under Section 801B of the Act and the 21 CFR 195 by obtaining product approval within the specified time frame. What actions FDA will take? Once a PLAIR is submitted, CDER PLAIR program will confirm receipt of the submission through the CDER NextGen portal. CDER will review the submission and assess completeness, timeliness, and among other things, foreign facility inspection history and conformity with applicable CGMPs. Following this review, the CDER PLAIR program will notify the applicant whether the PLAIR has been granted or denied through the CDER NextGen portal. Now we're gonna go to the importation process. The importer will upload the granted PLAIR letter into the Import Trade Auxiliary Communication System, or will email the Import ORA division where the entry is presented. It will use the affirmation of compliance for PLAIR and the application number in the CBP's automated commercial environment system. Ensure that the foreign manufacturer is registered and include all non-importers in their registration prior to importation. The importer will upload the information, sorry. FDA will detain the product 6 months as an unapproved new drug and authorize the reconditioning in the manner and the conditions that were set forth in the granted PLAIR. How you secure release after detention when the application is approved. You will upload the approval letter into ITAX and the CDER NextGen portal, or you will email the FDA import district where the product is detained to secure release. No FDA Form 766 is required. The PLAIR covers that will be done to bring the product into compliance. FDA intends to refuse the unapproved drug if the application is not approved or 6 months has passed since the detention. The unapproved finished dosage form drug must be exported or destroyed within 90 days if it's refused of admission. Here are some resources that are available. We have the PLAIR guidance that describe what I just described in this presentation. We have our human drug import webpage, right? And some useful links to some of the information that is needed by the importer. How to contact us, you can email us at cderocplair mailbox at fda.hhs.gov. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Kim, and I'm a supervisor for the Division of Project Management in the Office of Generic Drugs. Andre gave a great presentation on PLAIR from the Office of Compliance perspective. Today, I'm going to zoom in a little and focus specifically on PLAIR for ANDAs and give you the Office of Generic Drugs perspective. So there are 3 main points I want to cover, which are 1, describe OGD's PLAIR process for ANDAs. 2, explain OGD's goal for PLAIR. And 3, I want to leave you with some tips to maximize your chances for the FDA to grant the PLAIR. As Andre covered earlier, the PLAIR request begins with the Office of Compliance evaluating the PLAIR request and assigning it to the Deputy Director for the Division of Project Management. DPM's role is to decide if the PLAIR should be granted or denied. The PLAIR guidance provides request submission timeframes, or what I'll call the 30-60-80 rule. So all requests can be submitted no less than 30 days prior to the goal date or action date. For standard review applications, PLAIR requests can be submitted 60 days prior to the goal date. And for priority review applications, they can be submitted 80 days prior to the goal date. The Deputy Director then checks the database, and if the outcome is unclear, they'll request the Regulatory Project Manager, or RPM, to evaluate the likelihood of the disciplines being adequate or inadequate. The RPM will then consult with discipline PMs, and if the outcome is inadequate, they'll recommend denial of the PLAIR. If the pending disciplines are likely to be adequate and other disciplines are adequate, the RPM will recommend that the PLAIR be granted. Finally, the Deputy Director will then communicate that grant or deny decision to the Office of Compliance. So in an effort to mature the PLAIR program, OGD's goal is to maximize the usefulness of PLAIR by granting in advance of the goal date, while also avoiding a granted PLAIR that inaccurately indicates an upcoming action. So as a result, there will be more PLAIRs granted independent of a formal adequate decision. And finally, there will be more time required to grant the PLAIR. So for example, as I had mentioned earlier, for a priority review application, which the PLAIR can be submitted up to 80 days prior to the goal date. In these instances, sometimes the decision-making on PLAIRs may be deferred until an assessment of the disciplines, until the assessment of the disciplines which are still pending may be made. So the next two slides here are a little wordy, but I wanted to provide you specific examples so that you can refer to it later. So for PLAIR submitted in a pending original ANDA or major amendment, OGD will now delay its response to a PLAIR if OGD believes an assessment decision is coming soon. So this is in contrast to previous practice where OGD would immediately recommend denial in the absence of an ANDA assessment being complete and adequate for relevant portions of the pending application. By deferring decision-making on PLAIRs in this situation to later on in the review cycle, the goal is to allow for more PLAIRs to be granted. For PLAIRs submitted in a pending minor amendment, if the discipline or disciplines have not yet completed their assessment when a PLAIR is received, OGD may now recommend granting the PLAIR absent of a signal of a potential deficiency. So this is a paradigm shift where previously a grant decision was only made when the disciplines had completed their assessments and found their portion of the application to be adequate. It's important to note that FDA granting of a PLAIR does not represent an implicit or explicit statement of the approvability of the ANDA, and if FDA does not approve the application, the product is subject to a refusal of admission into the United States. We tried to balance the industry's desire to grant more PLAIRs while balancing avoiding too many granted PLAIR that inaccurately indicates an upcoming action and potential for the product to be subject to refusal. However, there will be some inherent risk and certain situations where a granted PLAIR will not lead to an approval in time, leading to a refusal of admission into the US. Finally, I want to leave you with some tips to maximize your chances that the FDA will grant your PLAIR. If you follow these tips, the odds will increase of a PLAIR being granted. First, complete your amendments, meaning address all of the comments from a CRL, IRDRL with your amendments. Number two, address your IRDRLs on time. However, don't violate the first tip by racing to respond on time without addressing all of the comments or questions, which may lead to more cycles or an incomplete response. Number three, assure facilities are adequate. Having facility problems is one way to guarantee a PLAIR denial. Four, assure DMFs are adequate and be aware of the ANDA action timing. Be in communication with your DMF holders so that there are no unsolicited DMF amendments submitted close to action, which could delay approval due to DMF amendments having to be reviewed. Number five, and I think this is the most important, but work with your regulatory project manager or RPM. While they cannot provide you a specific approval date, they can provide you the current discipline review statuses, a rough estimate of action dates, provide you an advice on when to check back on the status, and also provide confirmation of imminent action dates. Finally, subsequent PLAIRs are allowed, but be reasonable on the timing of subsequent PLAIR. While it's allowed to submit after denial, you should communicate with your RPM, and if you just had a PLAIR denied, think about some of the reasons why it may have been denied before you resubmit a PLAIR. For example, if you didn't address a CRL or facilities have issues, you should not expect that PLAIR to be granted if you didn't address that. It's always good to reach out to the RPM and have a conversation on a reasonable timing to submit a subsequent PLAIR. So for our challenge question today, when should a PLAIR not be submitted? A, no more than 60 days before goal date for ANDA subject to standard review. B, at least 30 days prior to proposed entry date of shipment. C, up to 120 days before goal date for ANDA subject to prior review. Or D, up to 80 days before goal date for ANDA subject to priority review. I think I heard C, that's correct. Up to 100 days before goal date. And this is actually the time frame for NDAs and BLAs, which I didn't cover today. So in closing, remember the 30-60-80 rule when submitting a PLAIR. Work with your RPMs and follow the tips, making sure to submit amendments that are complete, responding to IRDRLs on time, making sure DMS and facilities are adequate, and this will allow your PLAIR to be granted and successfully import unapproved finished drug products to prepare for market launch. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Tom for the next presentation.
Thank you, Andrew and Andre, on your presentation on PLAIRs. Hi, my name is Tom Cheng, Regulatory Project Manager in the Division of Project Management in the Office of Generic Drugs, and today I'll be presenting on information to include with a cover letter. The learning objectives for today are to explain the purpose of the cover letter as well as the cover letter attachment, examine the FDA-issued guidances related to cover letters, evaluate pertinent information to include with the cover letter based on the submission type, and to discuss available resources for applicants to draft an effective cover letter. So what is the purpose of a cover letter? It's to summarize the contents and identify the purpose of the submission, to highlight key elements of the submission, to provide required regulatory statements, such as the MMA verification statement, and ultimately is to help the FDA route and manage the submission effectively. This first guidance I'll be discussing is called the ANDA submissions content and format. What's useful about this guidance is it provides recommendations on forms and information to include in a cover letter. It also provides a suggested cover letter template for your use. Now, as you all know, a cover letter is included in Module 1 in the ECTD submission. This guidance provides cover letter header recommendations to clearly state if any major changes are made to please include it in the header. These major changes can include anything from changes in strength, concentration, RX to OTC changes, just to name a few. Applicants are encouraged to use this template that's in the ANDA submissions content and format guidance. They can adapt their cover letter to meet their specific needs and the submission type. The second guidance, called ANDA submissions amendments to ANDAs under GDUFA, provides useful information on recommendations for content to include in a cover letter for ANDA amendments, such as a statement indicating whether the amendment's unsolicited or in response to an FDA assessment, or the amendment classification is major or minor, just to name a few. Cover letter components. So every cover letter should have the company letterhead, the submission type, date, heading and reference, including the ANDA number, generic product name and strength, as well as the ECTD sequence number. Here's an example of a heading and reference with the relevant information, including the ANDA number, ECTD sequence number, and the generic name and strength. The cover letter should have a statement of how documents were submitted in the file structure, a name, signature, and contact information of the person submitting the information, a responsible official or a U.S. agent for the submission, including their email address, and reference to, if any, relevant FDA action letters, emails, or correspondences. Very importantly, cover letters should have the MMA verification statement, a regulatory description of the submission, including the appropriate regulatory information and hyperlinks to submitted information, a technical description of the submission, including the approximate size of the submission, and a statement that the submission was virus-free with a description of the software used to check for the virus. Now, now that we've discussed cover letters, let's discuss the purpose of a cover letter attachment. It serves as a guide or a checklist to prepare the cover letter. It facilitates accurate processing of the submission. So it serves as a tool to optimize cover letter sufficiency, and this helps the RPM triage more effectively. It ensures that all relevant information outlined in the checklist is addressed in the cover letter. So this serves as a backup in case an applicant forgets to mention any important or unsolicited information in their cover letter. And this also helps the FDA triage and manage submissions effectively. So not only does this help the RPM triage more effectively, it also helps the disciplines during their assessment to locate and incorporate needed information more effectively. And this guidance, called Cover Letter Attachments for Controlled Correspondence and ANDA Submissions, contains a cover letter attachment template for controlled correspondences, originals, amendments, as well as supplements. Applicants can modify the cover letter attachment template to meet their submission needs. Now, it's important to note that this does not replace the cover letter. It's intended as an add-on to assist the FDA in identifying and routing submissions correctly. It's highly recommended to prevent delays in review time. An example of how a cover letter attachment can be used to prevent delays in review time is oftentimes requests for reconsiderations and facility-based requests for reclassifications are difficult to differentiate and will benefit with the use of a cover letter attachment, as the applicant can just check off the appropriate box on the checklist that's in the attachment to signify that the submission contains one or the other requests. Information that's commonly omitted in a cover letter. Again, you see the MMA verification statement. Priority requests on every resubmission, even after priority was previously granted. Unsolicited information, new or revised patent certification, litigation, or carve-out updates. Facility-based major to minor reclassification requests. And what's important about these are that the CGMP downgrade letter or withdrawn facility statement is necessary with the additional statement stating that the facility did not manufacture batches to conduct analyses to support the approval of the application. The major amendment information that are commonly omitted in cover letters include new batches and or studies, changes in manufacturing sites, reformulations, changes to DMF, as well as changes that would require an additional filing review. Another commonly omitted information we've been encountering in cover letters and in submissions in general are the identifications of a combination product. Under Section 503 G8CV, sponsors are required to identify their products as combination products and seeking agency action with respect to that product. This can be identified in the cover letter attachment, but it must be identified in Field 24 of the 356H form. And this is because combination products are under regulatory requirements, such as current GMP manufacturing practice requirements and post-marketing safety reporting requirements. So as a general review, what is a combination product? It is a product comprised of two or more different types of medical products. So a drug with a device, drug biologic, device biologic, or all three together. And for a more exhaustive list of what constitutes a combination product, please see 21 CFR 3.2E. For any questions regarding this topic, please contact the Office of Combination Products. On to best practices. Please include all new or major change information in the heading and or reference, especially if combining submissions. In this example right here, this is a major CR resubmission with new strength information, as well as new bio studies, clearly stated in the heading and reference to make it easily identifiable and easier for the FDA to triage. Now, although not required, it's highly recommended to include a cover letter attachment with your cover letter. Please highlight significant elements of your submission in the beginning of your cover letter. Highlight, bold, circle, anything to make it prominent and easily identifiable. Same goes with labeling carve-outs. Please separate each item in its own paragraph and use keywords versus vague or lengthy descriptions, such as reformulation versus changes to composition of product. So we have one challenge question for you. What are the commonly omitted information that should be included in the cover letter? Please choose all that apply. New batches or studies, changes in manufacturing sites, mention of unsolicited information in the submission, and priority requests on all submissions if applicable. And the answer is actually all 4 of these. So in summary, a cover letter should be used to help the FDA identify the purpose and route the content of the submission. It should clearly state any significant changes to the application are in the heading and or reference, as well as the body of the cover letter. And a cover letter attachment should assist the FDA in identifying and routing submissions correctly as well, and is highly recommended to prevent delays in review time. And these are my resources for your reference. Thank you. Steve.